Caddis Maximus here, this time with a quick review and comparison of slip joint pliers. And in North America, these would be considered the original type of general use utility pliers, and they are oftentimes the very cheapest pliers that are ever made. In many situations, $5, and there are $5 socket sets. They'll come with a set of pliers, and they'll be very poorly made, but they will be of this style. Really, I believe one of the most common styles of pliers ever made. And I'm sure that statement wouldn't be too far off if you looked at just absolute numbers of two-position slip joint pliers have been made on this planet, at least. And real fast, I wanted to do a quick correction and clarification on my lineman's pliers. I had a few different pliers that probably weren't appropriate, such as these Ideals, because they have the crimpers in the front. These are actually advertised as heavy-duty crimpers, and they have large gauge cutters in the back. So technically, those wouldn't be considered lineman's pliers. Those are heavy-duty crimpers. But I included these odd pliers in that review because they're the most similar, and I'll do a better job of making sure. The other thing was this set of pliers, these Heikos right here. These are the European version. They call them combi pliers or combination pliers, but this would be essentially the European version of these. And the big difference is these kind of look more like lineman's pliers, but they have similar properties to these, such as a plier portion, a nut or bolt turning portion, and then of course the cutter, where the cutter on these is on the interior of the jaw. And of course these are multi-position. And then these channel locks with the hook, these are actually tie wire pliers. And yes, they look just about identical to a lineman's plier, besides the spring, the hook, and the fact that the head's a little smaller. These obviously could be used for lineman's purposes, of course. But what these are advertised for in the slightly smaller head is just for wrapping, tie wire around rebar and that kind of thing. So I do appreciate my viewers pointing that out, as well as my comment about the Harbor Freight that had lineman's pliers with crimpers in the back of the jaw. Those are distinctly different from these Ideals, and so just because they were similar, I kind of said, or I did say, that Harbor Freight had a similar set of pliers, but they are different because the Harbor Freights are lineman's pliers with crimpers on the back, and that's really what the difference is whether the crimpers are on the front or on the back of the jaw, showing what's more commonly used. The lineman's pliers with crimpers on the back are when you need to occasionally crimp because you have to wrap the pliers around the wire, where these are on the front of the jaw so you can easily get a good grip. And to quickly finish it up, these type of pliers, even though they're advertised as heavy duty, these are, that's the difference between that's like a $30, $40 heavy duty crimper, but they're not really heavy duty crimpers. Ones like these are heavy duty crimpers. These are like $100. Harbor Freight has a knockoff, and they're still kind of expensive. But when you talk about heavy duty wire terminal crimpers, I don't use these type of crimpers. I haven't used them for a long time. Once I started getting crimpers like these truly professional ratcheting crimpers, I never went back. Anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about slip joint pliers. We have 7 different sets here from a variety of manufacturers. ChannelLock, Crescent, Stanley, S&H. We have a nice Craftsman here. We even have an OXO. An OXO is kind of like a household brand. They make lots of kitchen utensils, which are okay in quality. They're definitely, I'd say they're about mid-grade. But they do set themselves apart because they really try to have unique ergonomics. And I can appreciate that. I mean, they do have, their designers have a little bit more free motion, and they make, not the best, built products, but it allows them the opportunity to put out products that maybe significantly differently designed than what the traditional products are. And I kind of always liked OXO for that. And so they did put out a few tools, such as these pliers. Now, to start off with, these 2 sets, these channel locks and these old diamonds. Now, as far as I know, the Diamond Caulk and Horseshoe Company, and we can see these here, these are the K36s, was, I believe, who invented this style of plier a long time ago, more than a century ago. And they are really the original, and they were, of course, bought out into the group that got ChannelLock. That's why the channel locks are nearly identical, although these pair of pliers are probably made a half a century apart. And this is just a traditional style. You have a cutting surface, which is actually these 2 dies right here, right at the root of the jaws. You have a heavy coarse tooth portion for turning, nuts and bolts, and of course a standard plier, and then there's slip joints. So you have multiple different sizes that you can work with. So as far as I know, the Diamond Caulk and Horseshoe Company was who originally bestowed this style of plier onto the world, and of course ChannelLock still makes the very same thing to this day. They have a little bit coarser teeth for the nut and bolt portion, and they have a little bit wider handles so they don't pinch your hand quite as badly. And then of course most of these, they actually have a little bolt. This has a stamp, so it's a friction nut, so it doesn't want to come loose. But the ChannelLock has improved that by doing a hot rivet so it stays nice and tight. So that would be the original style. Now we have a variety of other manufacturers, such as Crescent, which saw that design and came out with another one, which is a bit heavier duty. You can see the jaws are thicker. They have a little bit wider surface. And we're generally just a little bit more robust a version than the original Diamond ones. Then we of course have some Stanleys, and they do make these in larger sizes. That's the point of this. And on really modern ones, they started, manufacturers started to distinct or add some features such as the second nut portion for turning small round objects versus larger round objects. And of course, they rubberized handles, which are always nice on tools. I have really learned to appreciate the soft grip handles. They even make large ones, such as these S&H's. I do not know if these were the previous owner who had welded on them. That's something you never want to do on tools, is weld on them, because the heat of the weld can damage the heat treatment as well as cause warping. It's not a big deal on a set of pliers like this, but I did want to mention that. These S&H's are pretty nice. I don't know if the previous owner had bent these off at whatever this is. It's about maybe 20 or 30 degrees. Or if they came like this. But this is a very handy set, because of course they are bent, so you can grab a hold of stuff against a flush surface, and surprisingly enough, I've used these quite a bit. One thing I did want to mention about the older sets of pliers is they really, for the handle grips and the style of knurling, they were really pretty artistic. I wanted to point that out. Like these old Diamonds, they are, kind of a more traditional knurling. They just had a roller that went across. But you can see on these Crescents, they have this really interesting pattern here with dots and cross hatches, and then linear lines at the top and bottom. I thought that's a lot of effort for the texturing of a grip. And these S&H's actually have S&H on them, and they have these other interesting patterns. So I always kind of thought, when I noticed that was a form of artwork in tools, is these handle patterns. And I always appreciated that, and it would kind of been a nice touch for them to still have that now, but I'm sure it was quite expensive to put those kind of patterns on the handles of these tools. One thing I did want to mention is all the cutters on these, the way they work in the bottom of the jaws, they're never particularly tight. They won't cut stranded wire pretty well, but they cut solid metal wire and tie wire and those kind of general things, solid copper conductors. They cut those pretty well, and that's kind of what they're intended for. What's nice about these SHs is they have a groove. And the reason you would want a groove is when you put in something to cut, say this big piece of wire, when it bends, it wants to fold over and end up folding in between the two halves of the jaw, which is pretty notorious when you're cutting thinner materials. It'll just get jammed between the jaws. So when you have a slot and the wire starts to bend down, it actually acts as a stop and makes it more effective. So even this pretty heavy piece of wire, you can cut pretty effectively just with a pair of pliers like this. And if we look at this here, we can see that it really did. It just pressed on a little bit and then just sheared the wire right off. So it doesn't really cut, it shears. And so to finish up this review, we'll go ahead and talk about these Craftsmans and the Oxos. I have the Craftsmans out because as far as the physical build quality and how they look, these Craftsmans are some of the nicest I've ever seen. These Craftsman machined the surface of both surfaces of these pliers, and they made the rivet flush cut, so it's really a nice smooth finish. And they had a really high definition forging dies. That's why I was also really impressed by. And they were indeed ground after they were assembled, because you can see the pattern on the top of the rivet matches the pattern on the handle or the arms themselves. And you can see that they match when they're in this open position. So it's always kind of neat to see those witness marks and be able to tell that they ground it after it was assembled and in the wide position. And another aspect of high quality ones would be the definition of the jaw. You can see that they had really high quality broaching when they made these jaws, and they're just really nice defined teeth. I like the smaller portion because it forms just a bit of a larger round, so it's a little bit more effective. And as a compromise, they have a little bit thicker jaws than these ChannelLocks, but they're not super bulky like the Crescents or these S&Hs or any of the larger heavy-duty ones. But indeed, there can be some very nice, high-quality slip joint pliers. So even a cheap form of pliers can be made really well and really be a great addition to your tool collection. Some of my favorite ones are these Oxas. So I'm sure they're not the greatest quality steel. The little screw rivet that they use, it's not a rivet, it's a bolt with two flats cut in it. So when you open these, the little narrow portion aligns to the flat so you can slide it back and forth. And so that is a little bit smaller on these than it is on the other tools, although the beam size is just as thick, and you can easily see that these are forged, so they're not that bad. I kind of like the satin chrome finish. And they also have a nice jaw design on them, very similar to the Craftsman. But they have extremely wide handles. You can see these handles are almost as wide as my thumb. And then they have a very thick, you can see how thick that overmolding is. So of course this overmolding, if these are getting beaten around in the toolbox, will eventually get cut up and start falling apart. It's inevitable, just because it's very soft. But when you're using them, that extra soft, extra wide surface is just so much better. It really is a lot more comfortable in your hand. And one thing that maybe younger people won't realize is as you get older, grabbing a hold of pliers like these with thin handles, and if you're trying to do something where you really have a lot of force and it rolls around your hand, sometimes it can pinch pretty bad. Not saying that I'm super old, but one of the few things I noticed from my 20s is that you can't just press onto tiny, thin little metal surfaces with all your body weight and have it not hurt. As you get older, those kind of things pinch more, and the more you appreciate tools that have much wider, greater contact area grips. The other thing I like is this little kick right here. It allows you to have a great purchase, you know, a very solid grip. And it makes it a little bit easier if you want to twist because you have a little bit of additional leverage. It also, when you're doing pushing operations or really wrenching on something, it just prevents your hand from wanting to slide down, and I always appreciate that. That's like a nice design feature right there, and I kind of wish a lot more pliers had something like that. So even though these are cheaper slip joint pliers, they actually have a couple different significant features that I really like. A really soft, wide grip, and then a nice step there so you have a really good hand grip of them. But of course, being cheap Oxos, they don't even put part numbers on these. They don't think that many people are going to be looking for them. But really, they have a nice little set of pliers. I believe that will finish my quick review and comparison of slip joint pliers, which would be the North American, and I'm sure many other parts of the world. I mean, one of the world's most common styles of pliers would absolutely be this style of plier. And so I really appreciate everybody watching, and please subscribe. Until next video, bye.